Well, hello everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Big Blue Avenue. I'm your host Tom Scavetta, joined alongside Hank and Dichter. Great show in store for you folks here tonight. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, make sure to go follow us below on our social media platforms on Big Blue Avenue on Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. And of course, we live stream every Thursday on Facebook and YouTube at Review and Preview Sports. So make sure to go subscribe to us there as well. Hank, how are you doing tonight, my friend?
Doing pretty good. I think I'm not going to say I'm jumping for joy over the press conference, but you know what? I liked what I heard, feeling somewhat optimistic, and hopefully all goes well. Tom, how's it going, buddy?
It's going good, especially after Joe Schoen was named the new general manager of the Giants. Tonight, we're going to talk about that, go over some of the press conference takeaways, talk about some other team news, who the head coach favorites are. Obviously, the Giants seem to be close to hiring their next head coach. Then we'll go over some potential cuts over the course of the offseason and predict what we would do to help the team out and talk about some of the free agents. And we will briefly scratch the surface on the Giants' 2022 opponents. But first, Joe Schoen, named GM last week, assistant Bills GM coming down to not New York City, but the New Jersey area, the tri-state area, and held a press conference yesterday, Hank, at 11:45 a.m. What were your initial thoughts on Joe Schoen's press conference? Overall, I was impressed.
Yeah, so was I. It seemed like he pretty much addressed every single problem that the Giants were having and every single question mark and went at it head on. And he also acknowledged that, changes are going to be coming to the Giants. And I think he knows it's not going to be a quick process. I mean, obviously, thank goodness we're not going to see him trying to pull a Dave Gettleman by trying to be a contender while rebuilding at the same time. But saying that we'll compete, but while also trying to fix things, that is something that I very much wanted to hear. And I also think he really did a good, he did a good job analyzing the one of the main elephants in the room, which was the quarterback situation. And I think he also said what I would consider to be the correct answer. You have to bring him back next year. You obviously, there's really no point in drafting one that come the draft. I think you got to fix the foundations first, and not to mention, got to give Jones a shot with maybe the chance of having a better offensive line and having a better defense around him for sure. So overall, I would say it was a good press conference. Obviously, I'm not going to get too nitpicky about it, but it's a good start, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm going to guess that's Brian commenting. Thank you, Brian. LGR. We're tied at 2 in the first period. Hopefully we can get a win tonight before Henrik Lundqvist night tomorrow. And I would imagine you're probably going to be there for that too. So I will see you there, my friends.
Yeah, a very interesting time in the New York Giants world. Appreciate that comment, Brian Attard. But yeah, these press conference takeaways, it's interesting because obviously he looked nervous, and I like Shane already because he was a Giants fan growing up because of Mark Bavaro, who played at Notre Dame. So I'm a big Giants and Notre Dame fan. So that's, you know, two birds and one stone for me personally. And the Giants booked him the middle seat on a plane. Shane didn't complain. After the first interview, he told his wife and kids, he's like, this is the job I want. I want the Giants job. I'm really interested in that job. And I thought John Maris, Steve Tisch went about this hiring process very well. And the first takeaway that I have is his first quote saying, I promise that I will do everything in my power to build a team that will make you proud, both on and off the field. And this is huge for me because I thought Joe Judge built a good culture where you never had to worry about many players off the field, if any. And I didn't want that to get skewed. But it looks like Joe Schoen holds very similar values, and he's going to instill those in his next head coach here for the New York Football Giants. And I'm really excited to see what holds in store for this franchise because I do think this is a step in the right direction. Organization. And his second quote, which was an obvious concern, and this was kind of an indirect shot at Dave Gettleman on the Giants salary cap. It's a concern and it's real. And that was something I found very interesting because obviously he hasn't even sat down with Kevin Abrams yet to go over it. But that's what he's going to do before they make the player evaluation. So, what are your thoughts on the salary cap situation?
I mean, look, I don't necessarily think of that as a shot at Dave Gettleman. I mean, look, do you think that Shane and Gettleman really ever got into the room and like talked to each other about what was going on behind the Giants? No, I don't think so. And second of all, I think if anything, I think that quote really says more about how much homework he's done regarding the Giants. And look, let's face it, if you've even paid attention to the Giants throughout the season with the acquisitions they made, everybody knows that the Giants are in a terrible salary cap situation. What Dave Gettleman did was the equivalent of being a college freshman who has no experience with the credit card and spending it like crazy. And now it's up to Joe Schoen to pretty much get that credit, pay off all the debt with the credit card, snip it up, get it back to zero, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. I don't think there's a way you could fix this in one season. It's going to take some time. And I'm not really sure people have high expectations for the Giants this season, as I don't think they should. But his third quote saying, I don't take this job lightly. Yeah, sometimes it seemed like last year that Dave Gettleman, just kind of like, it's whatever, fourth year as GM, expecting to win. And I liked Dave Gettleman at the beginning. The 2020 offseason, he had a good offseason, but he completely undid what he did in 2020 in 2021. The contracts of Leonard Williams and Kenny Golladay. Leonard had the leverage on the Giants, so they had to make that move. But you didn't need to spend all this money towards Kyler Rudolph, Mike Lennon, John Ross, and Devontae Booker. Those are just a few examples. And Noah Deibler with the comment here from the Sports Box. Get Brian Daboll in, avoid coin tosses, profit. Love it. Brian Daboll is the leading candidate to be the next head coach of the Giants at this time, which we'll get into the head coach candidates just a little later, Hank. But to kind of build off of Shane, he mentioned that the team will plan to compete during the rebuild. Now, something similar to what Dave Gettleman said, but I think he's going about this in a different way. This is going to be a 3-year project, in my opinion, where you're going to keep the quarterback intact for this year, but there's no guarantee past that. You want to start building from the inside out, and it starts with the offensive line.
Absolutely. And I think, like I said, I've been saying this numerous times over the course of the season. If you're gonna start anywhere during a rebuild, I think the offensive line is the first place to start, because obviously you got to start fixing up the trenches. You need more protection for your quarterback. And, it's been an area that Giants general managers over the past decade have consistently whiffed on, despite trying to really improve it. And, I think there's no question that if you're going to go out and get somebody in free agency, which generally speaking, I know you and I agree that that's an area where the Giants should really steer clear from. I think you have to at least get like maybe a veteran presence on the offensive line. Don't have to like spend like crazy. Just get someone that maybe could be a cheap asset, someone who could provide you some leadership. And then obviously when you get to the draft, if you're going to use both picks, which I don't know if they're necessarily going to use both of them. I think one of them might end up getting traded over the course of the next few months. We don't know, but at least one of them you have to keep, and at least one of them you have to pick an offensive line. Otherwise, I think, if you don't start there, then you haven't even looked at your foundation. Although I also think getting an edge rusher is just as important too, I would say.
We have a couple comments here. One from James Montefusco, who's backstage with a rebuild. Can this fan base take another 3-year rebuild? I think if there's promise, and if the team competes week in and week out and exceeds expectations by just a little bit, I think there's real promise here, as in you may see the Giants win 6 to 7 games next season, and that'll be a step in the right direction if Daniel Jones has a good season, if these young players really start to develop, if you dump the contracts of Nate Solder and Kyler Rudolph, if you start to see progress, the coordinators are all in sync. Nobody's late to practice, having fistfights on the sideline. This ain't some clown show organization. It's never been, and that's why people want this job. Brian Attard with a comment. If it's a 3-year rebuild, Don't they have to make a move with a running back? Would be turning 28 at the end of that third year. You're 100% correct.
Mhm.
Don't make the same mistake that Brian Attard's Dallas Cowboys did in paying Ezekiel Elliott all that money, where you could easily get a guy like a Wayne Gallman or a Zach Moss in the mid rounds of the draft. That's going to be less money. You don't need a superstar running back in the NFL. What you need is you need a great offensive line, you need one go-to receiver, and you need a good quarterback. That's what you need on an offense. And, it all starts. You can have an average running back and still get by in this league. I mean, look at the Buffalo Bills, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. Look at the 49ers. Elijah Mitchell is a sixth-round rookie. The Rams, Cam Akers, Sony Michel. There's no superstar running back. And the Chiefs with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, perfect example, Brian. Thank you so much for making that comment. Make sure to go check out Brian Attard on Tuesdays at 8:30 on the Highly Opinionated Show. Looking at the backs playing this weekend. Right on, Tom. Yep, absolutely. The Bengals, I mean, you got Joe Mixon, who's probably the best one. But he's still young as well. And I don't believe he was a first-round pick either.
No, he was second, I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Joe Schoen also mentioned that they have to keep Daniel Jones on his feet in order for him to put his best foot forward. He's a great kid with a great work ethic and desire to win. The team will build around him. And as far as what he's looking for in the next head coach, leadership will be the top quality. They need to be into analytics and sports performance and conditioning. And they're going to cast a wide net of interviews. It doesn't matter if you were a head coach before, if you weren't, where you came from, this and that. The Giants are going to keep their options open, and Shane is going to meet with Kevin Abrams and clear some money, which will come after the player evaluations, which is smart. You want to meet with all your players and evaluate them before making any type of crazy moves, before cutting anybody, this and that. And it was mentioned that, yes, John Mara will not take his hands off of the head coaching hire, which is rightfully so. It's going to be a collaborative effort. You want a collaborative environment between your owner, your GM. As soon as Shane had this first Zoom interview, he wanted this job. He mentioned he called his wife and said, I wanted this job. And he also admitted, Hank, there are several key pieces on this team already in place, but injury issues have hindered them, as in the Giants, for a while.
Yeah, offensive line, that's an example. You didn't have Nick Gates. We mentioned that Nick Gates is probably would you agree, Tom, that he was probably one of the more reliable offensive linemen that we had during the 2020 season?
No doubt.
Didn't that guy have a streak of consecutive games played up until he had that gruesome injury?
Yep.
Shane Lemieux, we didn't really get to see much progress again because of the injury, and who knows how much better that offensive line really could have been with those two, because Andrew Thomas showed a great deal of progress, as we mentioned. Only one snap allowed over the course of, only one sack allowed over the course of 500 snaps. Dang it, you know what I mean here. But in any event, yeah, it's true. I think the offensive line was an area that could have showed improvement had certain players been able to stay healthy, but we also know that group did not have as much depth, and thus they were forced to rely on signing guys off the street. And gee, I wonder whose fault that is.
Yeah, 100%. It comes down to DG. James with the comment backstage, Hank, what about the left side? You know what? Talk about pulling people off the street. Yep. We're pulling James off the street right now. How's it going, James?
James?
What's up, boys? I don't mind. I'm just hanging out on Thursday night. There's no football. Might as well tune in to Big Blue, catch up with you guys. I didn't watch the press conference, so I'm getting all my information from you guys today.
Well,
James,
you're a part of the show.
Yeah.
And biggest things to take away, Giants are committed to quarterback Daniel Jones for 2022, which makes sense. Entering the final year of his rookie deal. Focus this offseason will be on the offensive line. It was Andrew Thomas, and then it was a revolving door between Shane Lemieux, Nick Gates, Ben Bredesen, and Matt Skura at left guard this season. So the left guard position is definitely a concern.
Yeah, big time.
100%. And other notes that Shane admitted, if you want to see what Saquon can do, it would be nice if we could block. And Joe Schoen has a very good relationship with Bill Parcells, who hired him as a scout over 20 years ago, saying that this Giants job was one of the best jobs to have. And he told that to Schoen, which encouraged him to take this job, you know. And Schoen also mentioned that Mark Bavaro was the reason why he became a Giants fan, and he played at Notre Dame. Schoen is from Indiana, so it makes sense geographically speaking. And I just really like where the Giants are at right now. We're going to get into the head coach interviews now, and the Giants have interviewed 6 candidates: Brian Daboll, Leslie Frazier, Dan Quinn, Lou Anarumo, Brian Flores, and Patrick Graham. And there's potential for more. There's definitely potential for more. I know a lot of people are saying we're nearing a decision, but you don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of days. Brian Daboll had 2 interviews, had a Zoom, and then they met with him 2 days after the Bills were eliminated by the Chiefs. So that was really interesting. I don't know about you guys, but Brian Daboll is my pick to be the Giants head coach right now at this time.
Oh, without question. Brian Daboll is the one coach. He's the one name on the list of all the people that it interviewed that I think really it was obvious that he had the head coaching material. I mean, this is a guy who improved the Bills offense, and you can say what you want about the fact that, you know, he's not going to have Josh Allen or the offensive weapons he had. Well, Brian Daboll had a hand in helping develop Josh Allen. That's the big reason why the Bills were the way they were. And I think one of the ultimate things that we heard about Brian Daboll was there was a tweet that was sent. It showed him talking to all his coaches. If any one of you guys have been in a position where you were fired, sit down. And then he did the same thing with his offensive players. If you've been cut or traded, sit down. And then he had, if you weren't in the first round, sit down. And then the only one left standing was Josh Allen. And then he's like, hey, Josh, how many scholarships did you get out of college? 0. Okay. Remember
out
where
of high school.
From? High school.
Yeah, or out of high school. Thank you.
That's why he played at Wyoming. This was a guy who played against little competition in college, and we know what Josh Allen is. You know, so the Giants also interviewed Dan Quinn, who's from New Jersey. We now know after today that Dan Quinn is now out and will likely be returning to Dallas, which I think is music to ears for a lot of Giants fans. And Sam Cardona says hello. How's it going, Sam? Oh, our third co-host that we miss dearly, Sam. We miss you a lot. Thank you so much for joining us here in the comments section tonight. Sam, who's your pick at head coach? We'd love to know. James, where's your head at right now?
My head's at hearing Daboll had so many interviews as soon as the Bills season was over. I know they're still looking into other, like Patrick Graham. I agree. Patrick Graham should get an interview. He was the Giants. He is still, if I'm wrong, correct me, the Giants defensive coordinator. He has every right to. He's shown what he's been able to do with that defense, even though the defense was on the field way too long most games. I think Daboll makes the most sense. I mean, considering you're coming from upstate New York down to New Jersey. So that looks nice. You know, you can still have your house up in Buffalo, but at the same time, he's sparking the most interest out of fans and out of the Giants itself. I think his development of Josh Allen and of that offensive line and that team as a whole will only help Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones has been pretty much through the ringer through his 4 seasons, right?
Entering his 4th,
Entering his 4th with who do we have? You know, the list goes on and on. It just makes the most sense because he can go up to Daniel Jones and be like, listen, this worked. Whoever he picks for an offensive coordinator will also help. Be like, this all worked for Josh Allen. He should be able to formulate something to fit Daniel Jones because they're almost the same kind of quarterback in a way, but not really. But it's the same type of style of play, which I think Dab would be 110% able to fix Daniel Jones and the offensive completely.
Yeah, if we can get him to what, like 50-60% of what Josh Allen is, I'd be happy. I'd be happy with that.
Big upgrade.
Yeah, and I think that would be really good to compete and be a consistent playoff team in the NFC. But Sam has a comment. She also loves Daboll, but wouldn't be upset with Lou Anarumo after you told me, Tom, he's from Staten Island. He seems like he would be a solid fit. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something about Lou Anarumo because everybody knows, all right, Dan Quinn is out. Patrick Graham was interviewed. It's probably not going to be him. And everyone's talking about, oh, Daboll, Frazier, and Flores. I don't think it's going to be Frazier, and I don't think it's going to be Flores. Lou Anarumo is the dark horse, though, and here's why. Not only is he from Staten Island, he was the Giants' defensive backs coach in 2018. He has ties to Joe Schoen with the Miami Dolphins. So this hire would make sense. And look what the Bengals defense was able to do, right? Everybody talks about Joe Burrow and that offense. Joe Burrow is not what got the Bengals to the AFC Championship game.
Mm-mm.
What got the Bengals to the AFC Championship game was their defense. It was their defense. So Lou Anarumo will
To
bring
be
a
fair,
lot of tools.
Joe Burrow got them to the playoffs too, though.
He did, but at the same time, the guy had no offensive line, and that's not really Lou's problem, but I see where you're coming from with that. Let me get to this comment from Brian. While I agree with that they should give DJ another year, what I think is a mistake is if they force him on a new coach, a new GM. Never think that's a good idea. Yeah, I don't think they're forcing him. I think when you're rebuilding, you don't want to get a quarterback right away because then your neck is immediately on the line and you want time for this to work out. You don't want a new quarterback stepping in when the team is not ready to compete. For instance, Patrick Mahomes, the team was set for him in Kansas City.
Mhm.
You know, so that's kind of where my head is at with that. Brian, I think Daniel Jones is the guy. And I will live and die on that rock. I really do. I know your co-host Mike Galetta feels a similar way, but at the same time, if it doesn't work out next year, it's time to move on. If his injuries are an issue again and his play is still okay to good, you have to move on. I think all three of us here can agree with that. Injuries have hindered him greatly throughout his first 3 seasons as a Giant. And Sam, also just have to say, I get Dan Quinn saying he's staying in Dallas, but it was weird. The Cowboys made an announcement that McCarthy is staying. Like, why would you announce it if you weren't thinking he might be out of here? Apparently, Dan Quinn really wanted this Giants job. I think that's the only job he really wanted, even though he interviewed with the Bears and the Broncos, who both hired their head coach today. And the fact that Dan Quinn is returning to Dallas means the Giants told him no, which leads me to believe the Giants have already hired their head coach, and it just hasn't been announced yet. Especially after Ian Rappaport made a tweet today saying the Miami Dolphins will be conducting second-round interviews early next week. If you put the math together and add all the dominoes up in place, who's going to be the next head coach of the New York Giants? Brian Daboll. And it's going to be announced probably late Friday or early Saturday. Dominic Daniele in the comments section. I agree, Tom. Defense played more of a factor for Cincy in the playoffs. That you do because it ruined our Titans money line this weekend. Not to mention, Lou Anarumo's defense held Derrick Henry to 66 yards on 20 carries.
And I will say this regarding Lou Anarumo. Having a defense coach isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world either, because let's not act like the defense was a strong point for the Giants this year. If it was a strong point, it was only marginally stronger than the offense. Let's be real. I think a lot of that had to do with Patrick Graham maybe masking up what had a lot of holes. I think we all know that they had trouble stopping the run, and I think really it was the secondary more than anything that was really a strong point of the team.
So Brian Flores was interviewed today. He got a second interview. Hopefully they figured out what went wrong in Miami. It seemed like there was tension between them and the GM. And, to just touch upon Brian Flores for a minute, everyone's saying, oh, he got fired after his team started 1-7 and they finished the season 9-8, winning 8 out of their last 9 games. What's the issue the Giants have been having the last almost decade? They get off to slow starts to begin the season. What has Brian Flores done his first 3 seasons? He's gotten off to slow starts. And that's not something the Giants can have. If you want to hire Brian Flores as the head coach, I wouldn't hate the hire. This is just my personal opinion. You may as well have kept Joe Judge if you're going to hire Brian Flores, because they're pretty much clones of each other. I'm telling you, from experience, both assistant coaches who got head coaching jobs probably too soon in their young coaching careers.